Welcome, everybody, to the first installment of Matt and Matt. We're Matthew McQueeny and Matt Garrepy. Talk tech, everything under the sun that we attend and work on and work with and partner with, and kind of follow a template that came from sports, which was something in the ESPN ecosystem called Mike and Mike. And so we're going Matt and Matt, and hopefully we'll be as entertaining and as successful, and we won't have an end like they had. But
for those that don't know, it was not great, but we're buds. It's going to be fine.
we will be fine, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things on every episode. It's going to come at you. I don't want to say bi-weekly because that might mean twice a week. So we're going to say twice monthly, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, just in our lead up to this, there's plenty to talk about. I'm actually coming to you from London, England, in Covent Garden, and you are coming from Winter Garden, right?
Yes, nice, close, not quite Winter Garden, Winter Park, but you got the winter part right. I think for those who have seen this act before, we've done the Matt and Matt show episodically as sort of the pas de resistance, the sort of rap that we do at big events where we're together. And it happened organically. And we got a lot of good feedback from folks about how we wrapped those sessions and good engagement around the videos that we would do. And we thought, all right, let's, we're both working on the edge in different capacities, but in very similar ways. We're talking to the broader community. Myself through CMS Critic, it's here, cmscritic.com. You're working on the iMedia side. So there's a great, sort of cross section around disciplines, but also the community with Boye Company, which is, part of what you're doing there in London. And I think the glue is people. So we're both passionate about talking to people in our industry. So we thought, let's try to do this on a more regular basis, try to periodically bring folks on to talk for a little bit about specific topics or trends that we're tracking, and then also bring a little color to the conversation around maybe a product or something new that's happening in AI. We're going to talk about a lot about AI. But I think the other operative thing to do is to keep you informed, right? So people who are tuning in on a regular basis get to hear a little bit more about what I'm tracking on CMS Critic. I talk to a lot of people, and there's an opportunity for me to maybe elevate some of those topics and themes. Matt, you're doing a lot of the same thing as well. So we're going to cross streams in this sense and kind of bring all that together and try to have some fun with it. And again, be a voice for community members as well.
To that point, I mean, oftentimes I find when you do a mission episode, it can feel silly, like we'll never get to this state, we'll never do that. But then when I go back and listen to mission episodes, you often deliver everything you say you want to do it because that's the reason you're doing it. And to that point that that you said there, we will look for this to be a platform where we can bring on folks from the community, whether they're the CEO, whether they're the founder, whether they are a partner manager, which isn't a bad thing or whatever, up and down, everyone has something to offer. And I think through the Boye Company group, which you referenced, the Giannis Boys great network globally, where just amazing serendipitous characters seem to come in your life. And he very frequently seems to have gotten them about an hour before the meeting. It's amazing. So we'll look to exalt these stories. And I think there's not really an outlet like this in this space. And that's not a good or a bad thing, but I think it's a place that we're happy to try to come in and vie for your mind share or your ear share or your eye share. So yeah, really excited to get this going. If anyone wants to hear a little more about Matt and myself, we did release an episode about an hour about your career and life on my Mix Minus podcast. So you can hear that, but
If you're
really excited.
If you're really bored and you want to know more about my background. You're going on a long run. You want to zone out. There's plenty of stuff in there. But yeah, that was a great episode. I think it was a chance to maybe do a level set. We said an announcement was coming, that we were collaborating on something. Maybe it was the worst kept secret. We've been doing this thing already, but I like the idea that, and you just mentioned sort of up and down the spectrum in terms of people's roles in organizations. I think that's really important because we want to expose people to some of the things that are being done at the ground level, in the trenches to, harness what's happening right now. How do you build in this new age with the tools that are emerging, vibe coding, things that are happening really, really rapidly? We want to hear from people that are, seeing how that transformation is playing out. There was I mentioned something that content.ai was working on in an article I did, an interview with Lucy Greco, who's an accessibility expert. We met at the CMS Connect conference in Montreal last year, and their content.ai is, they're working on this accessibility initiative with Scope, which is an organization that's actually, I think, based in the UK, that focuses on digital equality. And, I think being able to elevate, because again, we look at a lot of stuff, we're bombarded with a lot of messages, but being able to elevate what is happening from a very positive perspective as well, to invite those voices in to talk about an initiative like that is important for us to hear. And it's tough to, like you said, to get eyeballs and kind of see the forest through the trees on some of that stuff. That's what I'm hoping that we can do together. And I think the format will be, obviously we're not going to do this long intro next time. We're able to get to a little bit more of the meat, but the idea is to have a pretty consistent format where we talk about where we're at. Typically we're going to be on the road in a lot of cases, so we'll be able to report from different places, from different events. I'm doing a lot of coverage with vendors as well, so I'll be able to talk a little bit from a vendor event perspective. And then, being able to balance that out with, some of the topics and trends that we're tracking from week to week, month to month. And my God, it's changing so fast. So we can bring some of those topics up. We encourage you, I think, to say, hey, here's something. Have you guys considered talking about this? We may bring you on in that case, right? If you have an idea or a pitch. But I think, feel free to reach out to us and say, hey, can you guys talk about this, battle this out, elevate these points in a conversation. I think that's part of what we want to do as well.
Yeah, multiple destinations to give people their voice for their messages and to add to the mosaic of opinions and facts and all that. And I think when we look between CMS Critic, when we look between Boye Company events, one of the things, and we'll get to that, one of the takeaways that I had, because we always do like a takeaway part at the end of the day and a half, and I essentially jokingly said, nothing that we said over these last 2 days really matters, but the fact that we were all here to say it together in a space that is not being consumed by AI at the moment, unless people had recorders in there. But I don't want to say that AI is not a safe zone, but it's a zone for thoughts that are not having that pulled in. It's genuine firsthand experience, which is ultimately the one up we have as humanity, is to come together in rooms and to talk through as Giannis likes to say, the thorny issues. So it was really, really an exciting endeavor here. For myself, I started with iMedia, a digital agency based out of New Jersey, where I'm from, but that has global reach and works with a lot of the platforms that we all know. But this is my 4th week, and iMedia is very, very enthusiastic about their involvement with Boye Company, and for me going out and attending these. So I was really looking forward to this as almost a model for what I think these kind of trips can be. And in my opinion, for how I feel coming out, not coming home yet until tomorrow, but I feel like it was an amazing success from that point of view. I looked at the calendar, I saw he had this event in London, and I thought, hey, let me go. Let me go. You'll have enough of the regulars who you come to know from being at the Frankfurt event or coming to some
Right.
European events, or who come to kick off in Florida in January.
Yeah.
And then you're going to meet new folks. You're going to use this as an opportunity to connect in person with those contacts you have and to invite them to this special group to take part. And
Yeah.
as Giannis Boy often does, they have to give a presentation as their first right of being involved. And that's always great to watch. And then to look around the calendar, we talked on our little our podcast episode last week. We talked about clusters. When you come to a place like London, I love looking around the area for other events that might be happening that you can jump on because you're there. Again, for people who are around, for companies who are around, and you often find everybody seems to be there. I even saw that there was a Sitecore partner council advisory thing that was happening in the city,
Really?
which is like what? And
Yeah.
so it it was a really exciting thing like that, and I think anywhere between 6 and 10 relationships were moved along, were requited, were connected that might not have been so had
Yeah.
I not come. And I imagine that happens writ large with almost everybody who takes part in these. But
Yeah.
um, I do want to say I did sleep in today because we had a good night last night. I missed my alarm clock, and I woke up and my watch said it was 9:06 a.m.
Okay.
And
Important question. Important question. Did you happen to drink something last night that created the conditions, or was it just sheer exhaustion, or was it a combination of the two? I know when
it
I'm in
was
London,
everything.
it's all right. I'm going to end up at a pub somewhere after this, and there's going to be a photograph of me with a dark pint in front of me, and a big smile on my face. I'm sure there's plenty in my Instagram feed of that, but it's definitely one of those places that it creates that environment, and you have those opportunities to and this is what we do at all of the events too. I think there's a conscious effort on Giannis's part to kind of open the lens on what it means to be connected. It's not just being in a room networking. In fact, we sort of firmly resolved to not have it be have it be vendor neutral and not be a high pressure sales environment. Right, we're there to learn. But we then move that into the personal zone where people are able to connect in a very human way. And yeah, that happens. It's not a requirement that it happens with a pint in front of you, but maybe, one gets slid your way. And I think it just like we did in the kickoff event in St. Pete just last month. It, it was an opportunity to be really friendly about all of this at a time when there's a lot of anxiety, right? When people are feeling that tension. One thing I did want to say too, you have these things come out in that human space. We still use whiteboards, right? So we get in a room with a whiteboard at the end at the large scale, large format events, but also as you said, at the expert meetings, which I think was this one was like 30 plus people, right? So there was a pretty big turnout. At the bigger events, we're closer to 100. And I think getting everybody in a room at the end, having a whiteboard or, sticky notes that we can kind of go through this very tactile process of documenting what we did. And I remember it was just after I had the notorious conference cookie, which is, you get to like 3:00 in the afternoon and they roll out coffee and, you've got these giant cookies, big chocolate chip cookies. They're at every event, right? and you're looking at the cookie, you're going, no, I really want this cookie. I need to power through the next couple of hours. And it might be a good cookie, might not be a great cookie, but it's sugar. And I think it's like a sugar delivery system. So it gets you that little bit of a peak. And you go into this room with everybody and there's an energy. And I remember writing, Giannis saying, okay, Matt, what are a couple things that really stand out for you? And I wrote, and this was last summer, I wrote 2 words as things that I'm really paying attention to. And the first is orchestration, and the second is observability. Really big themes that I'm seeing, not just across the actual soft sort of technical architectural things that we need to be concerned with, but from an operational perspective. And that was I love that ending where we're able to get together and talk about that. Like, what's the wrap? What do you take away? And that kind of supports your point that it is about people. And I saw you write that in your piece, that, you're reminded it's not about products, it's about people. But I think that's a really excellent way for us to wrap those events.
Yeah, I mean, for me coming to London, in my life growing up, it was always anywhere that's not New Jersey was a foreign place, right? And I find that community closes the gap and makes what was a foreign place comfortable because of the people, right? I mean, even on this trip, one of my good friends, Peter Clisby from the Psychwork community, and he works at Remarkable now. He's been at Valtech in the past. He picked me up at the airport on a weekday at 7 in the morning, and we drove into London together to work. And it was a 2-hour traffic jam, which we didn't mind because it's a way to catch up. But we're
Right.
driving through these like neighborhoods. You're seeing kids at their bus stops. You're seeing life happen. That is bringing the global local. And I mean, one of the neat things overall was everyone always wants to really be competitive, right? It's like agency versus agency. It's vendor versus vendor. Sometimes it's vendor versus, it's all these things. And I, for whatever reason, across 2 days, I was in 3 different offices of people that were not where I work, working comfortably as if I was a member of their team. Peter took me to the Remarkable offices. We were working at 2 desks in those offices, and you could hear the calls and people going about their days. Then I was at Squiz's offices. They were a really fun bunch. And then with the Boye Company events, we often get to go to really interesting places to host these events. Like, you're
Right.
shocked sometimes. And so that was MSQ. I think that's what they're called these days, MSQ Digital or Partners. And this was like cool. It was like a TV show with just the beautiful wood floors, the big lofts, art on the walls, people all filling the office, going about their day. The 5 p.m., one of the most amazing 5 p.m. in office happy hours I've ever seen roll out, with like people serving the drinks and the food, and it's keeping them around. And it was like, it's enlivening to
Mm.
just float in and out of these kind of things. And it really makes you feel there's a lot of discussions with anyone in tech, anyone in any business, except maybe like plumbers and vocational things where AI doesn't seem to be overtaking these things yet. But there is like a fear of becoming insignificant, and that what you've put all your time into is about to be wiped away.
Mm.
And I feel completely the opposite. I feel very optimistic about all the places I'm being able to go and the people I talk to,
Yeah.
that it just gives you a boost that things are rolling. It's just going place to place. There's life, there's commerce, and that is one of the parts of this that is amazing. And it's those, like you said, going back to those nights, it's this assemblage of people who are together and might not be together again in that context ever again in their lives. And I got to catch up with team members from Altudo. Jonica Fernando is a Optimizely MVP. He's a phenomenal guy. He came to his first meeting and gave the opening presentation today, from an agency point of view and tech building and what AI means, which was great. And we were part of that 4-person group. I'll save the other names. I'm sorry, Jonica, I said yours, but we were part of that group going around the cobblestone streets, as I say, cobblestone conversations, wine bars in basements that I was joking are probably 1,000 years old, some of these basements. And just the connection and the feeling of togetherness is just, it's just phenomenal. And I think that is what I can't wait to tell the next. This isn't like a Sally Struthers infomercial, but you can't wait to tell the next group of people that you really respect and appreciate, hey, come to this, come to this. And so I come away very, very optimistic, and we talked ourselves through like a therapy session in some ways. You have the best minds here. How are we dealing with AI? How is AI dealing with us? How are we maintaining dominion over it, integrating with it? And that is just where things really step up. And I think from workflows and automations, I think Simon Jones, talked about accessibility.
Yeah.
Got to be a part of kind of a digital leaders, which is more towards the customer side element that he'll do for a couple of hours on the morning before the bigger conference. That was enlightening. That was a small group of big time people at major customers,
Right.
brands, talking through this. And I felt like the richest fly on the wall in the world.
That's awesome. Did I need to back up the truck for a second. Did you reference Sally Struthers in an
I
infomercial?
did.
That's okay. That's a deep cut, man. And had there been AI at the time, I think she would have been a great ambassador for AI, soften everybody's anxiety about it. So so it sounds like this was a great success in terms of how it translated for you. Give us a little bit more about you talked a little bit about things from the agency perspective. I know Simon Jones, I was on a panel, I think it was in Frankfurt that we did the panel that Simon was on. Obviously accessibility is a big topic. As I mentioned, I just did an interview with Lucy Greco, which was really illuminating for me. It is every time, Haben Girma, who was the first deaf-blind lawyer to graduate from Harvard Law School. I saw her at an Acqui event a couple of years ago, and it's we it's too bad that we have to have those reminders to take things back to formula to adopt accessibility at a design level. Where I work on the curriculum at Full Sail University for web, mobile IT, cybersecurity, some of the different programs that we have. I've long advocated for having like a digital ethics course that would speak to that. And I think, there's the embedded challenge of, well, this is what our graduates actually need to have just to get out in the field to be successful. It's not that there's resistance to doing it, but I think rather than having a dedicated course, we just need to have, as Haben and Lucy have made abundantly clear, we need to have practitioners in a room, people with disabilities who are going through this process, like actually reviewing things, involved and hired onto teams. I thought that was a really compelling point she made. But I think having like Simon and other folks that are in our community, talking about these topics and encouraging us to continue to keep our fingers on the pulse, especially as AI now becomes, and I talked about this with Lucy in the interview, and you can read the article on CMS Critic, but she's very clear that, man, AI has got a lot of promise, but it also is scary for people with disabilities, because she had great questions like, all right, if it's dynamically generated content, how can we ensure that it's not going to impact navigability or linking or the way that I'm able to tab through if I can only use a keyboard and not a mouse? I have that physical limitation. How am I able to navigate through an experience? I mean, they're all legitimate questions. And the fact that, we're just rushing in to sort of adopt the latest technology craze for great reasons, seemingly, like acceleration, ease of use. There's still that like pump the brakes moment. Are we actually listening to the problems and concerns? What really hit it home for me was she does product reviews, like consumer product reviews. And she's got a YouTube channel dedicated to all these different products that come out, washers, dryers, things like that. And she's always like pointing out, like, had they just done this, it would be great for people with a disability, but they didn't. And I think that's like a very telling signal that we're still not there. Hence, we need the advocacy. We need the continued advocacy. But so what else did you talk about that really stood out in the course of the conference?
Yeah, so the other piece to this is that in the middle of the conferences, I went over to Shoreditch to Optimizely's Partner Connect event as well. So it was kind of this wash of all of these interconnected worlds within a 2-mile radius, essentially, in London. And I think from the AI point of view, there tends to be a feeling in our industry that Optimizely is differentiating itself by how it's handling AI, in the fact that it's making its AI, called Opal, agentic AI system, be its own product and platform in some ways. And I think they don't mind if it ends up disrupting the core business because they are bullish enough that this platform could be a platform of the future. And what you might see with a lot of competitors, and at this point, no one's right or wrong, but the competitors seem to be taking their core platform and then trying to infuse AI in it as a supporting role, as a co-pilot, if you will, of that system. And this is from my point of view, watching this and thinking through it. But as we were in the meeting grappling with how AI is affecting our younger developers, for instance, coming up, or even the older senior members of teams, and how it's decimating potentially workforces or not. And, you know, what started to hit my mind was, and Kimberly McCabe, who's a friend of mine, for a fellow Psycho MVP, she did a talk about challenging assumptions and almost brought like an MBA point of view to this stuff. And I was joking, we need more MBA, we need more MBA in the DXP. And it's a way to say, I think from a platform point of view, as we're talking about how this is affecting our industry is actually waiting, and everyone is waiting kind of with bated breath for what the next thing is. We've gotten this amazing technology, like the early days of the internet or the early days of mobile, and it's we're trying to attack it with what I think will end up being anachronistic thinking and existing platforms. So I kind of said to the group, we need to be talking more NBA. What are we disrupting towards? What is the next form factor for AI? What is Johnny Ive cooking up with OpenAI? Because what we're going to end up at is not going to be faster horses. What is the vehicle of this industry as we're looking to make faster horses? Will it be a new operating system that's at the terminal level of whatever that thing is, that becomes your true AI accelerator for yourself and for your businesses? And that's kind of what makes me excited, is we will get there. It's scary for the previous way because it doesn't seem to make sense. It feels incongruent. But that is really where I think the AI fear and panic is coming from a bit, because we're trying to think with our existing tool set. And it's probably scary about, well, what could it be? And we need to just continually work, keep hitting the stones together, and find our way towards that reality, right? Like the iPhone came out, everyone thought it was amazing, but it still took some time before the App Store came into it. And then the App Store changed everything. And I think we're waiting for that, and people are getting close. And it might not even be from here, this industry, but that's kind of where I feel about that, about how the conversations were melding.
That's awesome. So a couple things. Well, first, it's great that you got over to the Optimizely event. So that was just kismet. It was serendipitous that was happening at the same time. So that's great. I talked to, and there's an article on the site as well, an interview I did with Kevin Lee about this very thing, about Opal being abstracted. And being a very intentional strategy to enable, again, I think the idea is that agency partners can utilize Opal in a variety of different ways to build their own agents, right? And sort of sidestep the limitations of it being the concern of a proprietary system. Because I think that's the friction we're going to run up against, is a lot of this stuff is still kind of, and you just made that point, is still sort of the domain of the kind of walled off thinking that we've had being in a product driven business. And I think there's a pedagogy around SaaS, right? Just as this concept of, how the business model has evolved and allowed us to enable users and make those users equate to a certain value. So through the MBA lens, how do we grow a business? But the problem is that, and again, I'm gonna do a little shock and awe moment here, but I think I'm like about a decade or more older than you, right? So there's a little bit of a generational cohort effect here, in that I've been watching this a little bit longer, and working in tech, and never before seeing the breathtaking pace at which stuff changes. Like, just shit just falls apart, right? So when you wake up, and I've taken to calling it the deep seek moment, where you wake up on a given morning, and I remember watching Squawk Box back in the day, in the first big tech gold rush, and feeling like this exhilaration around the things that could happen with my customers, like Veritas Software or IBM, and that was all exciting. But the time it took to build channels, to build go-to-market strategies, right? All of this stuff, I think, what gives people the sense of impending uncertainty and that being a persistent thing is that all of the systems, it's not just the limitations of thinking about tools a certain way, but all of the systems that surround it are being disrupted as well. So how do I build a business, when, Jack Dorsey as a business leader is saying, hey, maybe I don't need all these people to do this. Maybe I can, drive this from an agentic first perspective and bring in automation to solve a lot of these problems. Now, I'm not saying that's every business, certainly not going to be. And I think it's short-sighted to believe that human judgment isn't going to be critical to solving this problem. I talked to Chris Willis at Domo, another article, another interview on the site that you can look up. But we talked, I think, end of last year, and he's what they call a chief design officer. And it's not just product design, it's human design. Like he's thinking about how do we build better teams? How do we organize more with confluence and sort of a common vision around what we're doing? And, we talked a lot about, I have great data that I've been presenting in conferences about the shift in opportunities for developers. This is something Matt Billman has talked a lot about as well. He and I have talked about that the definition of what a developer is has been a disruptive thing to the career field for a while. But I think the to have all of these systems disrupted, and what Chris was telling me is that, look, a lot of companies last year saw this coming and they started to downsize. But many of them quietly hired people back because they were like, we're having so many problems that people were solving before and we didn't have to think about. And now we're orchestrating these tools that don't have the judgment, and they're not going to have the judgment. And I think it's, there's a couple things I've seen. It seems crazy, but is there a time in the not too distant future where the cost to operate, just take ChatGPT as a flashpoint example, but the cost to operate these systems in AI is more expensive than a person? Because I have to pay for the compute time, I have to pay for the data center resources. I mean, we're wrestling all of these questions, and I think that's why being able to talk about it in real world terms. And I may have mentioned this on our last podcast that when I was in Detroit last summer, and I talked to people who were feeling that, like this was it was more like an empathy conversation than it was about here's how I'm using cursor to bytecode something. We were talking about people's anxiety, and I thought that was so cathartic. So I think it was great that you got an opportunity to see how a business is able to break down its own biases and concerns around how it's using tools like optimizing and saying, we're going to do this even if it affects our traditional business models. I think people and systems and the way we think of a business, what a business is, we have to be willing to challenge that as well. So all of that is happening, and it's great that you're able to get that kind of well-rounded picture while you're there.
Yeah, well, the other thing that just came to mind, Kate Kenyon, I think she's been a pretty long time member, and now she's at JP Morgan Chase. She's just like a content savant. She's like really great at content. And at the digital leaders group in the morning, oh my gosh, the conversations with her was so great because I spoke about my talk on thought leadership and how it affects AEO. And she kind of like, you're like this too, right? We're in an industry, but we're kind of marketing guys. We enjoy the innards of that stuff, maybe the way that the tech builders don't as much. But she said a point that really resonated, and there's a kismet moment to this as well, by the way. But she brought up the fact, and this was probably in her talk at the CMS Experts group, but that when we started digital marketing in the earlier days, you were like that busker down in Leicester Square with the harmonica and the guitar and the drums on your foot, Remember you did everything.
Oh, yeah.
You did, and you didn't realize you were doing everything because it was the early days. So you're doing content production, you're doing front-end programming in the form of HTML, you're a video editor, you're audio editor, you're doing SEO, you're doing social, you're doing CRM, you're the list builder. And now in mature organizations, how many jobs actually have a vertical in the company for that skill? They have at least an accountable individual for what, probably 6 of those roles. And that brought me back to my time as the in-house beat writer of the Nets at like 24, 25 years old. And I was more than happy. And I didn't realize that that was doing a lot. You just did it all, right? And by the way, as I get to the next point, I was walking with Nick Condon to dinner in Mayfair, and I had a Guinness and I was jet lagged. But walking by me was the CEO of the Nets when I worked there.
Oh my God. That's
And
crazy.
I didn't realize it in time to like stop him because he's like a real fast moving guy. But I was like, what the hell? So I put an article out today and I likened it to another Ghosts of Christmas Past thing that happened in London, A Christmas Carol. So I'm basically walking the same streets. I couldn't believe this. And I had to like look up why he would be there. He's the head of the Big 12 now, and they're getting sponsorships in UK, I guess, or they're going to do a game here. So I was like, okay. But it was like my first day here, and he walks right by me, and he's a twin. So you didn't know, but it was him. But anyway, she said this point, and it led to an epiphany in my head of right now, we're kind of treating AI like it is that monolithic job. What if AI gets its equivalent 6 to 8 jobs atop that way of thinking, that system, right? Where when we started, all those things made sense as the domain of a digital marketer. But now we're kind of doing the same. It's like, oh, that's the head of our AI. Like, there's going to become multiple jobs. And even further from that, one of the pieces that everyone always finds interesting when we're talking about GEO is what one of the top sources of GEO is, which is Reddit. And you remember Reddit a decade ago as kind of this rough alley where people are getting on, and now it's like in prime time. And Kate was then speaking about, because I brought this idea about maybe it'll create 6 jobs where we have 1 right now as it gets more mature. And she said that one company she knew of hired a linguist in a role where you might have hired a marketer before, because the linguist would work well atop a model. And so I'm wondering, I brought this to Giannis, maybe it's a thesis we can work with. In the way that AI has brought Reddit to prominence, could AI bring the jobs of the past or the degrees of the past where the parents would say, what the hell are you going to do with a humanities degree? What if that becomes the great degree now?
Oh, well, I mean, that's already happening, if you believe headlines from like Business Insider. And I think I might have mentioned this to Scott Brinker the other day that Business Insider had an article. They specialize in clickbait. They're just the very, very intense hooks to pull you in. But it was like, this job pays $775,000 a year, and you don't have to know any code. And I read the article, and what it's talking about is how storytellers are becoming one of the most important roles within organizations. There's a little bit of what I talked about at kickoff. In the end, I was over time, so I couldn't go any deeper into it. But product evangelism is about being able to tell not just one story, but I think multiple interconnected stories that support how your product or your offering can be a solution, but it doesn't lead with that. And there's a very important distinction in all of that, right? We don't try to oversell where the product is. You try to talk to the market like you understand their pain points, like you understand the issues and problems, or you have a take on a trend or an angle that you're able to bring your thought leadership to. But what the article was pointing out is how not just technology companies, all kinds of consumer product brands are investing in people who have respect and authority, but also are able to tell the story without ChatGPT. They're able to, cut through the noise and support that storytelling in a meaningful way. I don't know about the salary figure. I think that was designed, with, again, that sort of clickbait mentality in mind. But I think it's already happening. I think to your point, people who specialize in these, we'll call them more abstract areas of academia, may have an advantage in being able to translate some of those capabilities. Now, I think there is the wisdom quotient as well of what kind of industry experience, what kind of relevant transposable experience do I have? But good storytellers, I think, have the ability to maybe learn rapidly about where a product or service has value, and then start to understand as marketers maybe where does this fit? And I want to be clear that this wasn't a marketing role per se. This maybe falls a little bit more into that product evangelism capacity within an organization. You bring up a good point too, though, about because I just talked to an SI that said, yeah, we're hiring somebody. They're going to be like the head of our AI. And one of the things I talked about at kickoff was, what happens when it's not AI anymore? Like we're putting a lot of weight and emphasis today in branding around the concept of AI having this big value in what we do. But at some point, there is going to be this commoditization effect around, and we're already seeing it, frankly. But to go back to an early part of the conversation, part of what you were addressing is how do we together take that MBA lens and focus it on, where are we going? Something Eric Stein told me that I put in the wrap for last year's symposium was that, I asked him at the end, I said, what does the next year look like? And I think he said something like, oh gosh, I'm so glad you didn't ask me what the next 5 years look like, because we can't think in terms of the next 5 years anymore because of the reasons we just talked about. I mean, everything's happening so fast, and we'll wake up tomorrow and there's a new hill to climb on or die on. And that's compounding the pressure of, how do we plan around that? So the systems have to be intentionally modular, malleable, able to be, sort of shrink wrapped around either a new concept or a new direction. The ability to pivot, to go back to basketball, your recent Christmas story, the ability to pivot is going to be so important. So that I think the greatest friction right now that we see with the SaaS apocalypse is that confrontation that established companies and brands and systems have with this reality that, we can't pivot that easily. This is going to be hard. And, people are worried about that. Tell me, maybe to put a cherry on top of this. So what is the goal now with, when you think about how you're cultivating these communities with Jan? I mean, we're both doing it with Giannis and been doing it for a while, but what do you take away from this? That, all right, the next time we do a meeting, this is how we facilitate more success at a time when I think people are showing up to have these conversations, the thorny stuff, like you said, that Giannis speaks of. How do you feel that, this can be better, in a wet clay fashion, kind of massaged into even better experiences for people?
Absolutely. And two very quick things. One, we are hopefully proving we are great storytellers. So if Google, if Anthropic, if OpenAI want to pay us each $1 million, I'm going to go on a limb and say, you're in, I'm in, just putting it out there. Second thing, you brought up a great point on basketball and pivoting. And if you catch a pass on a pivot, you have what's called the triple threat. You can shoot, dribble, or pass. If you use your dribble, you have two options. So we should all act as if we have the triple threat once we're ready to pivot. So we shouldn't be going down just one path and run into a wall. There's never been a greater time for optionality. When you look at the sparring aspect, that's another thing. I hadn't heard this. I don't know if it's an English thing. I was in a coffee shop and they didn't know what a pound cake is, even though their monetary thing is pound. But she's like, what's that? And I go, I think it's that thing. And I showed her a picture. She goes, oh, that does look like a pound cake. She goes, that'll be two. She's like, that'll be 1 pound. I was like, oh, okay. So it's a pound cake. But they were talking a lot with the word, I think the word was sparring. I hadn't heard this. I know like co-pilot collaboration. again and again, the attendees at the event would talk about AI as a sparring partner. And I was like, wow,
Oh,
that's a really
yeah.
interesting way to say it. It makes a ton of sense. You don't know how your punches land if you don't have somebody else to either catch them or deke or move, or if someone's not punching back. So
As
I thought
long
that was
as
like a
it is as long, not to interrupt you, but as long as it's not being sycophantically biased, right? I think that's the problem. Is you get a sparring partner, you want them to not pull their punches. Did we just turn into the Mike and Mike show? We were talking about a lot of sports stuff, but it's I think it's a great metaphor. I love it because it is about experimentation, right? And you're in a sandbox or a boxing ring, and you're kind of duking it out with yourself, and they're your kind of ride along that you're sparring with. I love it, but I think that's one of the challenges that we have with conversational AI is this, and certain models is that its capacity to give you glowing feedback on everything you're doing. Right? That's a great idea, Matt. Run with
they're
it.
like,
And I'm like, okay, yeah,
it's like,
I
what
can
an
do it.
amazing punch. Oh
Right.
my God, that
Right.
hurt.
Yes. Even though you fell back and were knocked out, it was still an amazing punch. So I think that's the trick is, and I've heard this from, people like, CEO of Core Media, Soren Stamer, who said the same thing, that this is one of the problems is, yeah, we have a lot of AI slop. Dominic at Storyblock has said that too. And that's one of the challenges that we have, but they're all kind of tuned into the fact that, yeah, we've got to trust doesn't come easily, and the training of the models is tricky. But yeah, so to continue with your point, it's
Yeah, no, that was those were kind of those pieces there. I wanted to, bring up the basketball and um
yeah,
I got lost on the pound cake, but it was funny. But
it's good.
y- I I think that from the minute I joined this community, when I was brought in by Bart Amlo, who at the time was the CEO of Content AI, and I had heard of Boye Company. It's around, it's always he's he's an amazing networker, and he's persistent without being annoying at all. So, um, he he's like, "Oh, do you want to come to this thing with me?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yes." Ever since that first meeting, I, it has felt like the exact right place to be and the right environment, and you find your tribe, as they like to say. And
Yeah,
the good thing is, in this world, it's the tribe of the whole industry. And when Giannis feels that you're connected with him, and you appreciate him and he appreciates you back, it becomes this like flywheel,
yeah,
and you end up referring in people you really trust and believe in the industry and
yeah,
think would be great. And one of my favorite things is seeing, I think 4 or 5 people came to this one event on my recommendation. And I feel like a proud parent, even though I'm not their parent. I'm not going to put that out there, but I feel like really proud when I see them present,
yeah,
and they get the Boye and Company crowd vibe where no one is ever really taking you out. Uh, Kimberly McCabe spoke an NBA thing. She goes, I don't even know if it's going to hit. And everyone was, she's like, it was so much silence. And I go, no, that's how they are. They're supportive. And then once it ends, people start giving like constructive discussion that moves things forward and did pick up something. And it's like, I don't want to use the word slop because it's bad, but it's kind of like you go in there, you're a little not perfect.
yeah.
And it's like when I saw Jerry Seinfeld show up at the Comedy Cellar in New York City with a piece of paper, and he's just reading jokes off and hearing if people in the crowd, we were there to see some like lower level Sirius XM
Right.
host who's trying comedy. And Jerry's like, I gotta see how my jokes land. So it's that feeling of like anything is possible, and you're hearing things in the formation, in that wet clay, as you were saying, and we're dealing with them in real time, and we're offering support, and we're offering community, and oftentimes we're offering a connection between people who don't know each other but should,
Yeah.
and will benefit from it all. And we're all walking the cobblestone streets looking for 1,000-year-old wine bars.
That's a story. See, that's a story. And I think one might describe everything that you just said as a bit of sparring, right? You're in a room, you're trying stuff out, you're getting feedback from people you respect and trust, and That's awesome, man. We used a lot of time today doing a kind of a, all right, why are we here? What are we doing?
Yes.
What are Matt and I trying to accomplish? And it's to be, again, I always think of CMS Critic as being a bit of a town square. We want to take that to the next level, be more interactive with it. I did want to mention before we get off a couple things that I'm tracking that I think maybe line up a bit with what you talked about. One, and I think we can save some of this for next time, is, I think I want to make space for open source to talk about that through our work here. We have a lot of big things happening this year. I'll be speaking at J-Day USA, which is the Joomla event in April. We're doing the first ever open source CMS conference in October, and that's pretty exciting because no one's ever done this before. You bring all the ecosystems, or at least the ecosystems that want to participate. Many of them on like the Open Website Alliance in Europe, but bringing them into one room to talk about all the things that are happening. And a big part of that is Drupal, like just the transformation that Drupal has gone through. You can go read my interview with Dries Bytart, founder of Drupal. Is also involved with Acquia at the top of the company. But Dries and I have known each other for a few years. We caught up recently in talking about AI. Now, this is stuff we were talking about a couple years ago before our Montreal event with Giannis. But a lot has happened, and I think it's something we're going to continue to talk about is how AI is becoming the core. So we're talking about a transformational moment for the concept of what open source projects, open AI, open source projects with AI as a central part of not just the community driven piece of it where a widget or plugin or some application is being developed that brings AI to the core. We're talking about a big sea change. So I want to talk about that, maybe on future episodes, but encourage people to go read it. It was a really well engaged conversation. And I want to save a little bit of time today to talk about this MACH Alliance study, because I think you had a moment in this conference where the MACH Alliance was brought up. And I think perhaps some folks in the room were either connected to or were vendors that have perhaps are part of the MACH Alliance. But tell me a little bit about that experience.
Sure. And just as a transition to that, Umbraco is open source, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are a lot of there are different perceptions on how we define open source, right? There's the MIT license. There's the what part of your ecosystem is open source and what part of it is managed as a commercial entity. Is this a big project that everyone's working on as a sort of ecosystem, or is there a part of your business that you've rendered open source? But yeah, I mean, exactly. And there are multiple vendors in the ecosystem that are that fit that bill, right? That, like Strappy, had open source, right? So
right. Yeah. Well, the reason I bring it up is I felt like, and I think you feel this way too, that under the stewardship of Matt's, if we have him on, it'll be Matt, and Matt's. But under
triple
his
threat.
stewardship, triple Matt. But he was well, it would be the triple Matts. I guess that's okay.
Yeah.
But he seems to be trying to create a change in perception of Umbraco. Not that there was a bad perception, but to bring them more into that enterprise. And I was very impressed by, his name is Frederick. He was here. He is actually moving to the US, and he seems to be very tightly aligned with Matt. It's almost like I don't want to say an understudy, but just so he was very excited in the idea of this show. And I know Matt has done some things with you. So
Yep.
this is an open call. We'd love to have you on, but they were very interested. And I'd say to watch, because this is a good thing of a show like this. Things change so quickly, quarter to quarter, perceptions that you could get stale really quickly, falling for old narratives when you talk about storytelling. So I do see a nice calendar year ahead here for potentially to keep a look on Umbraco.
Great
You
point.
brought up the you brought up the MACH Alliance. Usually that is a point of discussion all the time. And I'm not saying it wasn't here because it doesn't matter. I think AI is just totally become the eclipse to the sun of everything.
Yeah.
But at the very end of the takeaways part of the talk, Giannis brought up, we didn't even bring up MACH Alliance. Is that something? And there was kind of a feeling of trying to figure their way in this new reality,
Yeah.
and what are they really today? And I think there's almost a leadership change from the founding fathers and mothers of it. And so you're very close in some ways with the MACH Alliance. What do you take that as, and what kind of updates do you have on MACH?
Yeah. So, and I'll try to keep this brief. I know we're running up against the hour. We're going to try to keep this to an hour, right? Is that the
Yeah,
main thing moving forward? We could talk all day,
absolutely.
obviously, but
I know.
everyone's going to
Joe
tune out.
Rogan
But
on
I
the
think
DXP.
right, Joe Rogan. We're not trying to be that. I think a couple things. So I just want to dovetail back again on Bracco, because Matt's is really great, and we had a great conversation. We did a webinar together about composable and about composable regret. And I think that that's been one of the consequences of, for some organizations that have endeavored to be composable. It's, the friction is such an important word. How we perceive friction as being a negative or a positive thing shifts the polarity around it. And I think there is, of course, friction in the sense that we are running up against barriers, but there's friction that, as that MIT article so elegantly framed, friction is necessary to keep the wheels of a car on the road, right? And if we sidestep that friction, we go off the road. And I think and I made that case during our webinar that, the failures that, when I've talked to enterprises, when I've talked to them about where they've had challenges and issues, and again, I've been on the MACH Alliance advisory board for, I think, since 2022, where I've seen the issues, it's been around that lack of friction and cohesion. That, we sidestep something, we don't fully embrace the mindset internally, we don't have the right stakeholders. More MBA stuff, Matt, right? Not the technology, but the plan, the strategy, the architectural approach. And that's when it begins to weave into more of the technical aspects of things. But we talked about that. So it's interesting to bring up Umbraco, because that they have been, they have a new product called Umbraco Compose. They're really leaning heavily into orchestration. Again, this is part of their go-to-market relative to, appealing to an enterprise cohort. But the reason why I brought it up is there's a research study that came out, and this is one thing that MACH Alliance does that I really love, is that they are investing their membership revenue into market studies that I think have relevance. And I've been watching these for years, been writing about them for years, reading them cover to cover, trying to glean, what am I seeing from the data? And they're working with third parties to do it, so it's legitimate. But, I think this latest one was interesting because it was sort of shining a light on composability as a force multiplier for AI acceleration. What we're seeing from organizations that have been polled in this study is that if they've embraced composability and they're far along on the track, they're like 70, 80, 90% of the way there, or completed a composable transformation, they are significantly further along in their AI adoption. Now, part of that could be, hey, we just have that kind of organization. We're fast. We move fast. We break things quickly. Maybe there's that organizational cultural mindset that's already working for them. But I think if you read deeper into the data, it's what's interesting is how the composable mindset, and we heard a little bit of this from Chad Solomonson at RDA, who was at the kickoff, and he and I have been talking quite a bit. And I think what he said during his talk is that, they're able to do things like this new rollout that they had at NRF, National Retail Federation, that AI is enabling them to be much more agile and faster with. And I think those organizations, particularly agencies, have an opportunity to be further ahead with it. So I see not just the technology vendors, but the whole ecosystem, composable ecosystem, benefiting from that acceleration. At the same time, it's, I think the MACH Alliance has been struggling with a bit of an identity crisis. I mean, this transformation from being champions of composable to, we envision an agentic agent-to-agent ecosystem and developing standards around that as the new mission, the new doctrine and mandate. And I've been talking a lot to the president, Jason Cottrell, who's not just, and you mentioned the mothers and fathers, founding mothers and fathers. This was a very intentional thing for MACH Alliance to say, hey, let's hit the brakes. Let's bring in practitioners who are actually working on AI to lead the organization, not just the set of vendors, commerce tools, content stack that have been the real champions of establishing the MACH Alliance, but bring in those practitioners working at the edge. And that's been, I think, helpful. But look, part of that identity crisis is the friction, right? So we need to think carefully about, what does it mean to develop standards for agents? We don't even have a good sense of whether Opal is the right way to go, Psychor AI is the right way to go, fully independent systems that are failing regularly because models are constantly being updated. There are so many challenges to this that developing standards seems like we're too nascent for that. So
Yeah.
I would encourage people to look at this. I've been getting into conversations with people about, what does this actually mean? What are we hearing from the market? And what I'm hearing when I ask people I talk to about this is that, particularly SIs, they're saying, hey, we're actually finding ways that we can sidestep certain technologies in the stack. Do we need this CMS as an example? And we saw that play out with Strappy and Sanity and Cursor. And we talked about the reasons, you and I talked about the reasons why governance and scalability, you need, a prototype is not enough. But I think an SI, system integrator, that has a sort of like a legacy or a heritage of building things for enterprises, they are very well positioned to get their arms around how to build and do it with intention and do it in a stable way. But I think we're moving so fast that everyone needs tools quickly. And, are they going to assume all of the risk associated with being the innovators, not just the maintainers, but the innovators? If they built their own CMS, where's the next feature coming from? Are they listening to their market of users? No, because they're a user of one. They're just an enterprise that built this for one use case. So they're not benefiting from the crowdsourced effect of lots of users, lots of customers influencing a roadmap, bringing new thinking to it. So what I like is that we're getting all the insight from different parts of the market. I'd encourage people to read it. I think it's, there's some good stuff in there. And to kind of circle it back to you, I think that's part of the reason why you didn't hear it is AI is the conversation. And the MACH Alliance is trying to figure out its footing relative to that. So we've kind of left composable as a mandate behind because everybody's either doing it or they've made their platform or tools more composable to kind of meet that in the middle. And we're at a place now where the big question, to go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, is, how do we plan for what's next? And how do we bring the right thinking to the table to do that?
Well, I think this was a success, Matt. We're about 2 minutes over, but that's pretty good
It was
for
on me.
us. So I think, thanks. This was a great first episode, and look forward to doing it from wherever we beam to you from the world.
Yeah, and we're going to do that. We're going to be, we've got a very busy schedule, the both of us, for the rest of the year. We're looking forward to bringing you great stories and being able to check in with you and bringing great guests on. So, all right, hey, safe travels back. Maybe hit another piece of pound cake or another Guinness before you ship out. But
I got to
I'm
get
glad we
those
did it.
fish and chips.
Fish and chips, man. You can't go to London without fish and chips. Come on.
Yeah, well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.